The morning fog clung stubbornly to the hills of northern France, curling around the jagged edges of cliffs and rolling down into the valleys like the soft exhale of some immense, unseen beast. Soldiers huddled on the deck of the landing crafts, their eyes squinting at the pale light breaking over the horizon. Somewhere beyond the shrouded waters, the enemy waited, hidden in bunkers and behind tangled obstacles, scanning the beach with sharp, mechanical eyes. And yet, for all the guns and barbed wire, the true battlefield had long been decided by forces far beyond human control, the very geography itself. Mountains, rivers, and coastlines would become the silent generals of this war, shaping every strategy, every movement, and every life. It began years before the first bullets flew. Military planners across Europe and beyond pored over maps, contour lines, and tide charts with obsessive precision, treating paper and ink as weapons in their own right. The mountains were more than natural barriers, they were living, breathing fortresses. In the Alps, passes like the Brenner and Mont Cenis channeled the movements of men and machines alike, dictating where tanks could roll, where supply convoys could snake through, and where the enemy could be trapped or ambushed. Commanders knew that a handful of well-positioned troops at the top of a pass could halt an entire division, using gravity and narrow pathways to their advantage. Soldiers whispered about the curse of the passes, the idea that once an army entered a mountain route, it could become a trap, the walls themselves acting as watchful sentinels of death. The Soviet Union, with its vast Carpathians and Caucasus, became a laboratory for this principle. German generals plotted intricate maneuvers to capture critical passes, aiming to cut off Soviet supply lines, while Soviet strategists prepared countermeasures, digging trenches and planting mines where no ordinary eye could see them. Geography, it seemed, had already drawn the first battle lines before any boots touched the soil. Rivers, meanwhile, were no less formidable. The Dnieper in Ukraine, the Volga in Russia, and the Rhine in Germany were more than waterways, they were defensive sentries, flowing silently but insistently across the land, separating friend from foe, life from death. Crossing them was not merely a matter of engineering, it was a test of courage and coordination on a scale few could imagine. Pontoon bridges had to be floated under enemy fire, amphibious vehicles tested against unpredictable currents, and soldiers trained to move silently through the water while artillery shells splashed dangerously close. The slightest miscalculation could drown hundreds, leaving the river itself a grave. At Stalingrad, soldiers waded across the Volga under a storm of bullets, their bodies drenched, hearts pounding, and the icy water numbing their limbs. Each crossing was a small miracle, each successful landing a testament to both human ingenuity and the merciless power of nature. Engineers became unsung heroes, balancing calculations of current speed, river width, and bridge strength against the ever-present threat of enemy observation. Mistakes were fatal, and the rivers took no prisoners. And then there were the beaches. The coastal landings of the war were where geography met the brutality of human will head-on, the very edge of the earth becoming a theater of chaos. Normandy, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa, names now etched into history, were not chosen by chance. They were measured, calculated, and scrutinized with a mathematical precision that might have seemed excessive if it weren't for the cost of failure. Tide schedules, sand composition, surf height, and slope of the beach were all scrutinized as carefully as enemy troop deployments. A high tide could lift landing craft dangerously close to obstacles, while a low tide could reveal deadly mines and hidden spikes. The sand itself became an adversary, soft dunes swallowed vehicles and slowed infantry, while hard-packed areas exposed soldiers to enemy fire. Engineers tested every possible variable, while meteorologists predicted wind, storm, and fog with a nervous obsession. Even then, nature refused to be entirely tamed. A sudden wave could overturn a boat, a gust of wind could scatter troops, and the enemy always adapted, creating obstacles that no map could fully convey. But beyond calculations and maps, beyond engineers and generals, the geography of war shaped the human experience in ways less measurable but no less real. Soldiers learned to read the land as instinctively as they read a rifle sight, feeling the subtle rise of a ridge, the deceptive stillness of a river, or the deceptive slope of a beach. Fear and adrenaline intertwined with the terrain itself. A mountain pass could feel suffocating, trapping men between sheer cliffs. A river could feel alive, pulling at boots and threatening to swallow everything. A beach could seem infinite in its exposure, leaving men vulnerable to eyes hidden in concrete bunkers. Geography was no longer a backdrop, it was a participant, dictating not only the strategy of generals but the rhythm of daily survival. Intelligence reports flowed ceaselessly, describing terrain features with the same urgency as enemy positions. Officers would pore over aerial photographs, noting the contours of ridges and the likely paths of rivers. Spies reported on hidden obstacles along beaches, while engineers tested the load-bearing capacity of soils miles from the front. Every decision depended on an intimate understanding of the land, and yet, even with all the data in the world, nature had the final say. Weather could turn a planned crossing into disaster, rivers could swell beyond predicted limits, mud could trap men and machines alike. The war, in this sense, was a conversation between human ambition and the immutable laws of the earth, and the latter often spoke more forcefully than any artillery. Even the civilians felt the weight of this geographic warfare. Entire villages perched along passes or rivers became unwilling hosts to soldiers, spies, and artillery. Farmers abandoned their fields, townsfolk fled to higher ground, and bridges became choke points where life and death danced together in the smoke and dust. Geography dictated movement not only for armies but for refugees, supply convoys, and the very fabric of civilian life. Each hill, each river, each stretch of coast was a thread in the web of survival, connecting the fates of ordinary people to the grand strategies of generals. As dawn broke fully over the foggy waters, the landing craft edged closer to the beach. Soldiers gripped their weapons, hearts hammering, eyes fixed on the horizon. Somewhere, behind the ridges and rivers, enemy eyes were doing the same. And yet, the real general of this war was not a person, nor a plan, nor a strategy. It was the land itself, the mountains that channeled movement, the rivers that resisted intrusion, the beaches that punished miscalculation. Geography had claimed its role, silent and relentless, and the human story of courage, fear, and ingenuity was being written on its unforgiving canvas. In the end, the war would be remembered for its battles, its leaders, its bombs and tanks, but those who survived, whether soldiers or civilians, understood a deeper truth. The earth had been the first and most formidable commander. It had shaped victories and defeats with indifferent impartiality, and every soldier who crossed a pass, forded the river, or stormed a beach had paid homage to its silent, immutable authority. And so, as the sun climbed higher, revealing the full expanse of the coast and the looming cliffs beyond, a single thought persisted among those waiting to step onto the sand: in this war, geography had already won half the battle. Soldiers in the shadow of nature. The first light of dawn barely touched the horizon, but already, the low rumble of engines and the soft, anxious murmur of men filled the air. Soldiers crouched in muddy trenches or behind hastily dug foxholes, listening not only for the sound of the enemy but for the subtle cues of the land itself. A crunch of gravel underfoot, the ripple of water downstream, the angle of a ridge against the sky, all could reveal the presence of danger, the approach of reinforcements, or the narrow path to survival. In the vast theater of World War II, it was no longer enough to follow orders. Survival demanded an almost instinctive understanding of the terrain, a skill honed through months of harsh drills and endless exposure to the unpredictability of nature. Private Thomas Ellis adjusted the strap of his helmet as he peered over the edge of a hill in the Ardennes. The forest stretched endlessly below, dark and thick, concealing both opportunity and threat. He had spent weeks studying maps, memorizing ridge lines, and tracing the winding course of the river that cut through the valley. Yet none of his training could replicate the sensation of standing on the precipice, knowing that enemy patrols could be waiting just beyond the tree line. The mountains and forests, like silent sentinels, dictated his every movement, forcing him to respect every step as if the land itself were another opponent in this unending war. Across the continent, in the Pacific theater, the soldiers faced a different but equally relentless challenge. The islands were jagged mosaics of volcanic rock and dense jungle. Amphibious landings demanded absolute precision. Corporal Kenji Tanaka squinted at the chart spread before him, noting the timing of the tide against the contours of the reef. Every miscalculation could strand a troop in chest-deep water, exposing them to enemy fire or the choking grip of the ocean itself. Yet the land was only part of the battle. Tropical rains transformed trails into quagmires, mosquitoes bred disease, and the constant roar of surf masked the approach of both allies and adversaries. For Tanaka, survival required not only courage but adaptability and ability to anticipate the whims of both nature and human cunning. While the soldiers adjusted to the physical demands of their environment, intelligence operatives worked quietly, mapping the unseen edges of the battlefield. High above Europe, reconnaissance planes photographed mountains and valleys, rivers and bridges, feeding critical data to those planning the next assault. Analysts scrutinized the patterns of enemy movement, comparing shadows cast by ridges and riverbanks to determine troop positions. In the chaos of war, a misread contour could mean disaster. Conversely, a correctly interpreted slope could open a path to victory. Human ingenuity sought to bend the natural world to its purpose, but always with the understanding that nature was both partner and adversary. In many ways, the soldiers themselves became extensions of the terrain. Scouts and snipers moved with near invisibility, blending into the forest canopy or the jagged rocks of a coastline. Engineers laid bridges with meticulous care, calculating the load and timing of each crossing as if performing a delicate dance with death. Medics navigated mud-slick slopes, carrying wounded men on stretchers while balancing the constant threat of artillery or sniper fire. Every individual played a part in a larger symphony, orchestrated by the invisible conductor that was the land itself. The human toll of these operations was staggering. Crossing rivers in freezing winter currents, men risked hypothermia before even confronting enemy fire. On mountainous fronts, avalanches and landslides claimed as many lives as bullets and shells. In coastal landings, soldiers were forced to advance across open sand under the unblinking eye of entrenched defenders, the surf pushing back as if resisting their intrusion. Letters from home, when they arrived, offered little solace. Instead, camaraderie and trust became lifelines, binding men together in the face of relentless physical and mental challenges. The geography did not care for valor, and only those who respected its power could hope to survive. Even in the moments of rest, the land dictated the rhythm of life. Camps were chosen based on elevation to avoid flooding, proximity to water sources, and cover from aerial reconnaissance. Fires were lit sparingly to avoid detection, and patrols moved in patterns dictated by terrain features. Each day became an exercise in negotiation with the earth, a constant balancing act between tactical necessity and environmental reality. Maps, compasses, and aerial photographs were invaluable, but the soldiers quickly learned that intuition, honed by observation and experience, often mattered even more. One remarkable example unfolded during the Rhine crossings in 1945. Allied engineers had spent weeks calculating currents, bank gradients, and tidal shifts to ensure that pontoons would support the weight of tanks and troops. When the operation began, soldiers waded into icy waters, their boots slipping in the mud, their rifles lifted above their heads, every movement synchronized with the engineers' precise calculations. Enemy fire rained down, yet coordination and a deep understanding of the river's temperament allowed hundreds to reach the far bank. It was a victory that relied as much on the soldiers' respect for the terrain as it did on their courage or weaponry. Nature and human skill had converged in a rare, fragile triumph. In quieter corners of the world, smaller battles unfolded with similar intensity. Scouts in the Carpathians reported avalanche-prone slopes to commanding officers, influencing troop deployments and supply schedules. Jungle fighters in Burma adapted to sudden monsoon floods, learning to read the swell of rivers like ancient guides. Coastal raiders in Normandy memorized the subtle shifts of sand and surf, predicting the safest paths to reach enemy fortifications. Every theater of war, every environment, demanded a different combination of observation, adaptability, and courage. Geography was not just a backdrop, it was the most formidable opponent, shaping every decision, every movement, and every life. Yet for all the calculations, for all the maps and reconnaissance, uncertainty remained. Rivers could flood unexpectedly, mountain weather could turn lethal in minutes, and unseen obstacles could halt even the most carefully planned operation. Soldiers learned to anticipate chaos, to move with agility, and to rely on both training and instinct. They understood that the terrain was a silent partner, capable of crushing hubris and rewarding patience. The land did not bend to orders, it demanded respect. By nightfall, the soldiers found themselves huddled in temporary positions, exhausted yet alive. Fires flickered against the darkness, the soft murmur of conversation mixing with the distant rumble of artillery. Private Ellis, Corporal Tanaka, and countless others had endured the tests of rivers, mountains, and coastlines not just as a matter of strategy, but as a test of endurance, ingenuity, and willpower. They had learned that war was as much a battle against the earth itself as it was against any human adversary. And so, as the stars emerged over the battlefield, glinting coldly like distant observers, the soldiers understood a fundamental truth: victory in World War II demanded not only bravery but harmony with the land, a partnership forged under fire. Mountains, rivers, and coasts would continue to shape campaigns, directing both triumph and tragedy. In this interplay of human courage and natural force, the war revealed its most profound lesson: the earth itself was a general whose orders could not be ignored, and those who survived had learned to listen. The machinery of war, planning and logistics. The war was never fought on courage alone. Behind every charge across a beach, every night patrol through a mountain pass, every desperate river crossing, there lay months of planning, calculations, and logistics that often went unnoticed. In makeshift command tents tucked behind ridgelines, maps spread across tables like woven tapestries, generals and staff officers bent over miniature markers representing entire divisions. They debated not just strategy, but the physical reality of moving thousands of men, tons of equipment, and essential supplies across terrain that seemed determined to resist their every plan. In the European theater, the complexity of such planning was staggering. Consider a single crossing of the Rhine in 1945. Planners had to account for the width of the river, the velocity of the current, the number of pontoons and ferries required, and the timing of artillery support. Fuel, ammunition, food, and medical supplies had to be moved in precise sequence, or an entire operation could collapse within hours. Every soldier on the water depended on the invisible machinery behind them, engineers reinforcing pontoon bridges, signalers coordinating with forward units, supply officers ensuring trucks were loaded and timed perfectly. One miscalculation, a shortage of sandbags, a delayed pontoon, or an unforeseen rise in the river could turn a carefully orchestrated triumph into catastrophe. Logistics were equally crucial in the Pacific theater, where islands scattered like stepping stones across vast expanses of ocean. Amphibious operations required immense coordination. Landing craft, battleships, and air support had to converge at the exact moment, while troops timed their approach to the tide, the surf, and the enemy's positions. Supply lines stretched thousands of miles, vulnerable to submarines and stormy seas. Every crate of ammunition, every ration pack, every medical kit was a lifeline. Without meticulous organization, soldiers wading through volcanic sand or dense jungle would be left vulnerable, exposed not only to enemy fire but to starvation and disease. Commanders learned that in war, logistics were not simply support, they were strategy incarnate. The planner's work was informed by intelligence that was itself a product of human ingenuity and risk. Reconnaissance flights photographed enemy fortifications, bridges, and coastal obstacles. Spies and local informants provided detailed knowledge of hidden paths, tide schedules, and seasonal weather patterns. Intercepted communications gave insight into troop movements and defensive preparations. All this information was analyzed, cross-checked, and integrated into plans that accounted for every conceivable challenge. Still, uncertainty remained. No matter how precise, maps could not predict sudden storms, mudslides, or rivers swelling beyond expectation. The planner's genius lay in anticipating the unpredictable, in building flexibility into operations that, by necessity, had to succeed under fire. One of the most remarkable aspects of this planning was the orchestration of combined operations, coordinated assaults involving land, sea, and air simultaneously. D-Day, the Allied invasion of Normandy, stands as the defining example. Months of preparation went into determining which beaches to target, how to clear obstacles, when to synchronize artillery barrages with paratrooper drops, and how to maintain supply flow under enemy fire. Aircraft bombed and strafed positions to soften defenses, while naval gunfire aimed to protect the landing forces. Tanks designed to float across shallow water were carefully loaded and deployed. Soldiers advanced under a precise timetable, every second planned, every variable measured, but the human element and the chaos of combat always kept the planners on edge. In the end, victory was achieved not solely by brute force, but by an intricate web of coordination, foresight, and relentless attention to detail. Mountain operations demanded similar levels of precision. In Italy and the Balkans, armies faced terrain that magnified the importance of careful supply management. Narrow passes limited vehicle movement, forcing planners to ration trucks and allocate men for portering supplies by hand. Engineers reinforced precarious cliffside roads and dug tunnels to protect convoys from artillery fire. Even the placement of rations became a tactical consideration. A mispositioned supply depot could be lost to enemy raids or rendered inaccessible by landslides. Every logistical decision had the weight of potential life or death, as soldiers depended on these networks to sustain their fight across unforgiving terrain. In rivers, logistics and planning merged seamlessly with ingenuity. Engineers constructed floating bridges, pontoons, and ferries, often under the constant threat of sniper fire or artillery bombardment. Supplies had to reach the far bank almost immediately after soldiers landed. Medical teams had to be ready for waves of wounded. Timing was crucial. Too early, and troops risked exposure; too late, and the enemy could regroup and attack. Commanders often ran multiple rehearsals, studying aerial photographs and river currents to ensure each operation minimized loss and maximized efficiency. Each crossing became a testament to human ingenuity, precision, and coordination, proving that even in the chaos of war, careful planning could save lives. Beyond the mechanics of movement and supply, morale depended heavily on logistics. Letters from home, extra rations, and even small comforts, cigarettes, chocolate, warm blankets were meticulously transported along the supply lines. A successful operation was not just about reaching an objective, but about sustaining the human spirit under unimaginable strain. Soldiers often marveled at the scale of the machinery supporting them, the unseen networks that ensured they had food, ammunition, and medical care even in the most hostile environments. Without it, courage alone could not hold a front; with it, even the harshest landscapes could be conquered. In many ways, logistics and planning became a silent partner in every battle, as influential as the guns, tanks, and airplanes on the front lines. The meticulous calculations of engineers, the tireless work of supply officers, and the foresight of generals shaped outcomes before a single shot was fired. Geography: the rivers, mountains, and coasts remained a constant factor, but it was the coordination of human effort, guided by intelligence and reinforced by careful planning, that allowed armies to navigate these obstacles. Victory became a product of foresight, timing, and collaboration as much as valor or firepower. As night fell over the makeshift command tents, maps were rolled up and markers returned to their boxes. Soldiers rested, unaware of the countless decisions that had paved their way to survival, while planners continued their ceaseless work, already contemplating the next operation. In the interplay of strategy, logistics, and the relentless forces of nature, the machinery of war moved like clockwork, precise, unforgiving, and infinitely complex. It was a war where intelligence met terrain, courage met calculation, and every human action relied on countless invisible threads holding the fragile balance of life and death. And so, the world of 1944–45 unfolded as both a human drama and a logistical masterpiece. Every mountain crossed, river forded, and beach stormed owed as much to careful planning and supply coordination as to the bravery of the men in the field. Without this careful orchestration, even the most valiant efforts would have faltered. It was a truth learned in rivers and ridges, on coasts and cliffs. War was a symphony of both chaos and precision, and those who survived had to master the art of both. Triumph and trial, the human and natural battlefield. The first light of dawn crept over jagged ridges and mist-laden valleys, painting the landscape with a deceptive calm. The war had stretched for years, yet its final confrontations were shaping up to be the most decisive and the most unforgiving. Soldiers moved cautiously, not merely against the enemy, but in constant dialogue with the land itself. Mountains, rivers, and coasts had long dictated strategy, but now, the culmination of planning, intelligence, and endurance would be tested under the harshest conditions imaginable. The battlefield was no longer a series of engagements; it had become an arena where human resilience and the immutable power of nature collided. In the mountains of Italy, troops advanced along narrow passes, their every step a negotiation with gravity and rock. Sergeant Alessandro Romano wiped sweat and dust from his brow as he surveyed the rugged trail ahead. The enemy had fortified positions along the cliffs, using the natural contours to amplify their defenses. Every ridge, every ledge, every curve of the path had to be memorized and respected. A misstep could trigger a slide, expose a soldier to sniper fire, or collapse supply lines. Yet, despite the danger, the troops pressed forward, relying on months of meticulous preparation and the unyielding camaraderie that had developed among them. Each step was a calculated act of courage, balancing risk and necessity in a landscape designed to punish error. Rivers, too, presented their final and often deadliest trials. Across Europe, Operations like the crossings of the Rhine and the Elbe demanded the integration of everything soldiers and planners had learned: timing, reconnaissance, engineering skill, and sheer human endurance. Troops waded into icy waters, their uniforms heavy with the current's pull, as artillery shells exploded around them. Engineers worked tirelessly to erect floating bridges under the constant threat of enemy observation. Even the simplest tasks, a soldier keeping his balance, a bridge section being anchored, were amplified by the stakes. Success depended not only on bravery but on a nuanced understanding of forces far beyond human control. Nature was relentless, yet those who respected its challenges often turned its obstacles into tactical advantages. Coastal assaults had evolved into orchestrated masterpieces of combined operations. The lessons of earlier landings informed every decision. Reconnaissance had identified the exact composition of sand, the timing of tides, and the position of enemy fortifications. Amphibious vehicles and floating tanks advanced in a coordinated rhythm, while artillery and air support softened enemy defenses. Soldiers, aware of the stakes, moved with disciplined precision across the open sands. Every wave, every gust of wind, and every uneven stretch of beach demanded alertness and adaptability. Geography, once the silent general, now worked in tandem with human planning to produce outcomes that seemed almost miraculous against the odds. Yet, it was not just terrain that tested these final efforts, it was the sheer human endurance required to survive sustained combat. Weeks of exposure to harsh conditions, constant hunger, physical exhaustion, and psychological strain left many soldiers on the brink of collapse. Medics and supply officers became as vital as front-line commanders, ensuring that wounded men received care, that rations reached the most remote positions, and that morale remained intact. Letters from home, small gestures of solidarity, and the quiet determination of comrades provided lifelines, linking individual resilience to collective survival. In the face of such adversity, victory was as much a measure of human spirit as military might. The final operations also revealed the profound interplay between intelligence, logistics, and geography. Advanced mapping techniques, aerial photography, and spy networks provided precise knowledge of enemy positions and terrain features. Supply chains ensured that ammunition, medical aid, and food reached troops exactly when needed. Engineers, having anticipated natural obstacles from mountains to rivers to beaches, implemented contingency plans that saved lives and preserved momentum. In every theater of war, from the forests of Germany to the islands of the Pacific, success depended on harmonizing human effort with the environment. No amount of courage could compensate for a failure to respect the immutable realities of the land. The human element remained central even in the most technical operations. Soldiers adapted to rapidly changing conditions, improvising when maps proved incomplete or weather disrupted plans. Patrols learned to move silently over treacherous terrain, engineers recalculated bridges and ramps on the fly, and commanders adjusted strategies in response to unpredictable variables. Victory required flexibility, a capacity to read the land as much as to confront the enemy. In essence, the war had transformed human beings into extensions of the battlefield itself, learning from rivers, mountains, and coasts how to anticipate, react, and endure. As the final offensives pushed forward, the cumulative lessons of years became apparent. Mountains that once seemed insurmountable had been scaled, rivers that appeared deadly had been crossed, coasts that seemed impregnable had been stormed. Each success was not merely a testament to weapons or manpower, but to careful observation, strategic planning, and respect for the terrain. Geography, once an indifferent force, had become a partner in triumph, guiding decisions, shaping tactics, and influencing outcomes. Soldiers understood now that victory was inseparable from understanding the land, and that their survival had depended as much on preparation as on courage. In quieter moments, soldiers reflected on these truths. Private Ellis, now far from the first battles of the war, remembered wading through icy rivers and scaling narrow passes, understanding at last the delicate balance between human determination and the immutable rules of nature. Corporal Tanaka, having survived countless amphibious landings, realized that mastery over terrain was less about conquest than about cooperation with forces far larger than oneself. Across continents, men and women recognized that war was not merely a struggle between armies, but a contest with the very earth, a test of observation, endurance, ingenuity, and patience. By the war's end, the lessons of geography and logistics had been etched into memory alongside tales of valor. Historians and soldiers alike would come to understand that the mountains, rivers, and coasts were not mere backdrops, but active participants in the story. They had challenged strategies, tested courage, and dictated the rhythm of operations. And perhaps most importantly, they had taught that even in the face of human conflict, respect for the natural world was essential. Those who survived carried this knowledge forward, a silent testament to the enduring dialogue between human endeavor and the immutable forces of the earth. As the sun set on the final battles, casting long shadows over cliffs, rivers, and beaches, there was a profound stillness in the air. Soldiers walked among the remnants of the conflict, carrying both victory and loss in their hearts. The terrain, having dictated the terms of engagement for years, seemed to exhale, as if acknowledging the end of its role. Mountains, rivers, and coasts had shaped destinies, determined the limits of human endurance, and revealed the intricate choreography of planning, logistics, and courage. In their shadow, the human story of World War II reached its conclusion, a narrative of triumph, trial, and the ultimate partnership between man and the land.